wisdom, you know, so
We call it
as we get saging, there we go. As we age, it gets a little more difficult to jump back.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because I had surgery in January, and that wiped me out for maybe a week. And to me, that seemed more invasive than this one, but this one's taken a lot more out of me. It's taken a long time for my energy to come back. So even now, I'm feeling a million times better. But you know, the other day I was standing on my porch talking to somebody. I'm not doing anything. I'm just standing there having a conversation. And after a while, I was like, I need to go sit down. I'm done. You know, I have no energy left.
Yeah.
So that's about all I have. So I mean, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. I need to sit down. So.
Yeah. Well, you have to give yourself permission to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And luckily, there's good people that have been helping and taking over. Like Julie, you know, I kind of handed off some of the stuff I was doing and said, I'm not capable of doing this right now. But
it was fine. There wasn't much data, so it was not a lot of work.
That's what I was getting to. I'm like, I'm not getting any information here.
Yeah, no, and the fire department data came in at the 11th hour, and but Brian Cotter can't attend tonight because he got called in to work on an emergency. So Joel is going to present his portion, but they really can't give a lot of data because of different HIPAA restrictions on pulling people's, you know, call outs for EMS stuff. So Joel will go over it, but it really is just kind of a general, here's how much the fire department gets called out to 6 locations that have individuals experiencing homelessness. So just sort of.
Okay, that's kind of what we wanted to know anyway, right?
Yep, yeah.
Well, the thing I was surprised about, like from Joel, was, you know, I wasn't getting much information, but then if you look at like the crime log that's in the newspaper, you know, I was reviewing kind of like just a few weeks worth of that. And I was going to try to put the data together myself a little bit, but then, you know, what happened. And, you know, it lists a person with no set address, Like, that's all the information we need to know is what was the call? Was it a domestic violence call with somebody with no set address? That's the information we're talking about. You know, was it somebody experiencing a mental health crisis that has no set address? Perfect.
Right.
But for some reason, when you go to get that information, they can't give you that information, but it's publicly available if you could spend the time to dig into it. So,
yeah, it's not like we wanted to know, you know, Fred Smith had a mental health crisis. We just want to know, you know, 27 people got called out, or they were called out 27 times for a mental health crisis. Yeah.
Yeah, but that information's like, nope, you can't get it. Yet it's right there in the newspaper and on the website if you just have time to dig through it. So
yeah,
might be something we can spend more time in the future, you know, in all my free time, looking through, because I want to know. You know, I was trying to look through it a little bit myself, and I want to know, especially when I think of calls of, like I said, domestic violence, which we know a lot of domestic violence survivors end up homeless because of the situation that they're put in. I want to also, and then there's a repeat behavior, and then I want to also know, you know, just the mental health side of things. I think that's really important, and a lot of people try to dismiss that, but you know, yeah, I would say the average person doesn't say, you know, I'm going to go live in a tent. No, that's not the case, and people who are suffering from mental health are usually end up being the victims, and we all know that.
Charles, before you end up doing any of that data, talk with Brad Smith, because he and his son pulled, I want to say, like every jail record for some portion of time to try to look at this. But I don't know how long ago that was and over what portion of time they were looking, but he has done some research on that topic already.
It'll probably be a little while before I ever get around to it, but yeah, that'd be a nice short.
Great. Okay, well, I'm not going to start for another couple of minutes until we make it to 4 o'clock. But Peggy and Nikki, I am loving your backgrounds. Mine is such a boring office in comparison.
Well, just pick a virtual background.
That's right. You can be anywhere in the world you want to be.
So I had a weird thing. I used to use my laptop before I got this better camera. I used to use my laptop, and my laptop allowed me to do the virtual backgrounds. For some reason, with my computer that's far superior than my laptop and I have a better camera, it won't let me.
Here, I like this one as well.
So instead I just have this.
Linda's got a nice one.
Yeah.
I took this picture at the Circles in the Sand on Bandon. Oh,
Nice.
cool.
It's fun to transport yourself somewhere else.
Well, and just so you all know, next week I am taking off. It'll be my first week vacation since moving to Oregon last September.
Yay! Good.
My husband.
Are we allowed to know?
Yeah, no, my husband and our 2 little boys, they're 1 and 5. We're going to head inland about an hour and a half, and we've rented a cabin on the upper Santiam River, and there's no cell service there.
Very
That sounds great.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I look for when I go camping is like, can I go somewhere where no one can reach me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Julie, I just want to tell you, since you have a 5-year-old, my 5-year-old grandson had to call me today to tell me a great joke. Why was 7 so mean? Because he ate 9.
Yeah.
So I told him
5-year-old jokes.
So I told him a knock-knock joke. I'm sure he's driving his parents nuts with it right now.
Yes, he loves his 5-year-old jokes. They're almost as good as dad jokes.
Yeah.
Not quite.
Right. Well, unfortunately, I think his dad taught him this one. So.
Okay. I'm checking the chat here. Is that you, Andrea? Yes. Okay.
Hi, Joel. Joel and I met earlier. We were both on a different channel.
Well, nice.
We were both very early to the meeting.
We got it all figured out. So
Yeah.
whatever.
You were not the only one. I got a text from someone else at 3:05 saying, "Where is everybody?" And I had to text back and say, "It's not till 4." No, you're not alone. Well, I wanted to give you all a chance to just see each other's faces before I screen share the PowerPoint, because once I do that, it's not as easy to see everybody's faces. So hello, everyone. It's so good to see you all. I wish we could be in person, but this is the best we can do right now so that we can keep working, given the situation we have. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start this PowerPoint for you all. Let me move this over. Okay. There we go. Okay, a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. First, just wanted to welcome everybody. You're going to be on mute when you join. So you would have to unmute yourself or choose to be seen on video. And if you want to make a public comment, there's going to be an opportunity for that in about a minute here. So type into the chat area and say if you do want to make a public comment and on what topic. I don't see anybody calling in on the phone, but if I do see a phone caller, I will make, oh, here's one phone caller, a 503 number. I will give an opportunity for our phone caller if they would also like to make a public comment. And same if you have questions that you want to voice during the presentation. I think it's probably best if you put them in the chat, and this is for board members included, just so someone can finish their thought or finish the slide. We have a lot of data to cover today. Let me go to the next slide. So I wanted to start with just an overview. Welcome, everybody. This is the H.O.P.E Advisory Board meeting, if you're just joining. And I'm going to go over sort of the culture we want to set with this forum and with this board and give you an overview of the meeting, then an opportunity for public comment. The board will vote to approve last meeting's minutes. And then today there will only be one presentation from our 3 work groups. The data work group gathered an incredible amount of data in a short period of time, and that is all that we are going to present on today. And then the other 2 work groups will present at the August meeting. Here's our culture. So if you guys remember, back before COVID, when we were all in the same room together at the Sunset Building, the board threw up some ideas about what kind of culture we want to set. And so I just want to remind us as we talk here and present here or ask questions or give comments, to be respectful and open-minded and kind, because we're all here for good reasons. Next, just to share with you where we are in the process. This is only the, fifth meeting. We are on our fifth meeting of this advisory board because we got delayed by 4 months. Nobody was happy about the delay, but we are glad to be back to work. And just for all of you who are listening in from the public, you can see over at the August and future meetings, there is going to be an opportunity for the public to give feedback on specific topics. And we will engage all the different sectors of the community to give feedback on those topics. So you will have that opportunity. Okay, now I am going to stop the sharing for a second and see if, hold on just a second, see if there are any comments. Let me make this a little better. Okay. I am not seeing any comments in the chat. Stop share here. There we go. I'm seeing one person say you're having trouble with sound, but that was at 4 o'clock when you joined. Is anybody still having any trouble with sound? Good, I'm glad you fixed it. Okay, I see one person wanting to make a comment from Erica Koenig. You will be able to make your comment right now if you could limit it to a couple of minutes, and go ahead and unmute yourself, and you're welcome to start your public comment now. Thank you, Erica.
Hi, my name is Erica Koenig. I live on West Hills Road and work with the West Hills Neighborhood Association. I am admittedly not terribly familiar with the H.O.P.E group, but H.O.P.E was suggested as a possibility by the Safe Camp Steering Committee as a possible solution to our request for a community advisory committee. We had the land use, the conditional use planning commission meeting. I'm sorry, there's so much information I'm trying to give you right now. Last night, and I think we are attempting to find any avenue to ensure open neighborhood communication that we can in this process. And I guess we're coming to you to see if there is some help available.
Is there anything more that you wanted to say, Erica?
No, I mean, I think that sort of covers it. I don't know if we're putting bugs in ears or, you know, having, yeah, I think that's about my level that I can cover things on, so.
Well, and as I shared with everybody with the overview, I've spoken with Blair Gerard, your neighborhood association president, and received lots of that great feedback. And as we have priority topics going forward, there'll be opportunities for neighborhood associations, community members, individuals experiencing homelessness to give that kind of logistical feedback in the future. So thank you for joining and for listening, and there'll be another opportunity going forward.
Okay. Thank you.
We have one caller on the line. I'm going to unmute you because I don't know if you can unmute yourself when you are on the phone. So caller on the line with the 503-576 number. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you for a minute to see if you would like to make a public comment.
Julie.
Yes.
It's Christina.
Oh, good. Hi, Christina.
Hi, I'm not making a public comment. I had to join this way.
Okay, no problem. Are you able to mute yourself from the phone, or do you want me to remute you?
No, I can do it.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again so we can get going. with the presentation. All right. We need to vote to approve your minutes from last month's meeting. And if I could have someone please make a motion to approve. The only change that was made was just to spell someone's name correctly from what you saw.
I have another name correction. This is a lead on. In one place you have an E on the end of my name, and another one it doesn't. It does have an E. My husband pointed that out, so big deal for him.
Alita Hass-Holcomb, E at the end. Okay, I will be sure to make that
There-
change.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Jan.
Oh, I sent an email with the other corrections, copied to Paula Philippe.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, got it.
I received it, Jen. I received your email
Did
of
you-
corrections.
Did we put a motion together yet? I say motion, or am I seconding something, or?
You have to make the motion, Jan.
I make the motion to approve the minutes from June 24th with corrections as indicated.
It's June 25th. And were your corrections extensive, or was it more just grammatical? Does the board need to know about them?
There were 2 name spellings, and everything else was either a typo or a spelling or just a formalization of COVID or chance.
Okay, thanks,
Great.
Jan.
No big deal.
Do we have a second?
I'll second with Jan's amendments.
Thank you, Peggy.
Okay,
I'm
Peggy.
going to use this opportunity to take roll for the board. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second so I can see you all. Catherine Bisco is not here tonight, so she is an abstention. She couldn't join the meeting. She's excused. George Grosh, are you here? I don't see you. Maybe you are the one connecting right now. Nope. Okay, George is not here. Alita.
Here.
And you vote aye. I'm taking your votes to pass the meeting minutes and also doing roll. So aye, thank you. Anita Earl.
Aye.
Bruce Butler.
Here and I.
Andrea Myrie.
Here and I.
Nikki Hobbs.
Aye.
Reese Stotzenberg.
Here and I.
Carol Butcher cannot be here tonight. She has another meeting. She has an excused absence. Flip Anderson.
Aye. Here.
Jim Moorfield.
Here.
And you vote to approve the minutes, Jim?
Yes. Aye
Thanks.
and yes.
Brian Cotter cannot be here tonight. Someone called in sick and he was called in to work. He was sad to miss it. It was a last minute call. Joel Goodwin.
Aye.
I think you said aye.
I did. Aye.
Okay, good. Thanks. Barbara Hanley.
Aye.
Linda Tucker.
Aye. In here.
Thanks. Did I forget anyone? Peggy, oh yeah, the rest of our executive committee. Hi. Peggy McGuire.
Aye.
Zan Ojero.
Aye.
Jan Napak.
Aye. Here.
Charles. Thank you. Charles Mon.
Aye.
Christina Jansilla.
Yes and yes.
Thank you very much. I don't think I missed anyone that time. And now we have roll. All right. Let me go ahead and screen share again, and we will get this started. Our data group will be presenting to you, and I'm just going to frame their presentation for individuals who are joining, who are not on the board. Our bylaws are going to guide this work, and this board is going to be data driven. And so this whole meeting will be about what data do we have. And we will be taking a systems level approach involving the community. And as far as data goes, that's where this vulnerable and safety and racial and ethnic justice in our bylaws has driven our data collection. So this was what we shared with you last time. as far as what our work groups are doing. Work group 2 and work group 3 will go next time. Today we have work group 1. So backing up just to work group 1, they looked at data on any racial and ethnic demographics that we have across this whole spectrum. They looked for any data that we have on vulnerability factors like behavioral health diagnoses, being a veteran, having a disability, LGBTQ, or children or the elderly. And they also looked for any data on safety concerns to the individual themselves and also to the whole community. We had a variety of data sources. So I want to make sure you know where all of this data is coming from. And this PowerPoint will be made available on the H.O.P.E website afterward if you want to dig into more of these data sources. You can see where the data falls on our housing and services spectrum. We have lots of data from some places and not a lot of data from others. So we did the best we could to get as much data as possible to see where we have different data points on this spectrum. And one thing the board wanted to make sure to highlight is that given COVID-19, safety takes on a different type of meaning because we aren't just talking about an individual's safety with not having a locking door or domestic violence, but it's also personal hygiene and COVID vulnerability. When someone can't wash their hands with soap and water or use a toilet, they are vulnerable, and that's a safety issue. And then for the whole community, it's also a safety issue with COVID spreading. So we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that safety goes beyond breaking the law or an individual's personal safety. So I'm going to hand it over to Peggy McGuire, and she is going to start off the presentation from our data work group. And Peggy, I'm just going to go ahead and press the next slide whenever you're ready. So you go ahead and give me a heads up.
Will do. Thanks, Julie. So the majority of the data that we were able to collect at CSC comes from entities that do collect regular data and oftentimes have kind of like a specialized software to use. So for example, CSC is responsible for ensuring that we have a point in time count, and that happens on the 3rd week of January every year. That's dictated by HUD for any entities that receive HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development funding. And so we do the point in time count. This is the 2020 point in time count raw data, which you could see different data in the future because our funder, Oregon Housing and Community Services, looks at our data and says, we like this, we don't like this. And so they sometimes change it. So the raw data may differ from the official data that gets rolled up statewide and then sent to the feds. Men's Cold Weather Shelter, the Women's Shelter, Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center all collect data. None of us use the same data system to collect data. So it's impossible to tell whether we've got some duplicated data or not, but we don't think we do. So we've also got some comparison data that we've pulled from Benton County Census and the Benton County Community Health Improvement Plan. So go ahead and change the slide, Julie. What we looked at was racial disparities and ethnic disparities in the homeless population. And so again, all this data combined and then broken down into demographics. And you can see the blue numbers on the bar graph are Benton County data. So 1.2% of the population are African American or Black, but in the homeless population, 7.2% of the population are African American or Black. And so we go across the bottom axis, Black, Native American, Pacific Islander, and Hispanic. And then you can see the disparities between the groups. Julie, go ahead and go to the next slide. We also looked at people who were unstably housed. So they were at risk of eviction. They maybe were sofa surfing, a variety of different things. And again, broke them down by their demographics. And here's what you can see for Black, Native American, Pacific Islander, and Hispanic. And once again, there's quite a disparity in the persons of color between those that are housed and those that are not housed. Low-income housing voucher population. The Housing Authority of Lynn and Benton County operates a program where people receive subsidies to help them with their rent, and it's based upon an income eligibility process. And so those folks who are receiving housing vouchers, again, you can see that there's quite a disparity between people of color and the traditional Benton County population. In the different shelters, people are asked to self-identify what their race or ethnicity is. And here again is another breakdown as compared to the Benton County population. You want to go back to that? Yeah, there we go. So again, you can see that there's quite a disparity.
Sorry, Peggy, I was typing a chat to Alita and it ended up going to the next slide. Apologies.
No worries, no worries. And I think, you know, one of the points, and here's an observation that's on the bottom of the slide, is that the Native American population is substantially overrepresented in both the male and the female homeless populations. And I'll just add that from my background as the former director of the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, we also know that the Native American population is disproportionately impacted by housing discrimination. So by people turning someone away, refusing to rent to them, quoting them a higher rent rate. So it's not surprising that they're also more represented in the homeless population. Okay. We looked at vulnerability factors, and one thing that isn't tracked across all systems is LGBTQ status, and so that one was a little bit more difficult to get information on. We looked at people's disabilities, we looked at whether they were veterans, we looked at their affiliation with domestic violence situations and domestic violence organizations. And again, you can see that the people who have these vulnerability factors are have a much higher rate than the ordinary population of Benton County in the homeless population. Samaritan gave us some data on behavioral health disparities, so mental health diagnoses, substance abuse disorders, and co-occurring disorders. And you can see once again that the unhoused population has a significantly higher proportion than the general population of the county. I was so grateful to receive the information from the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center. They really flesh out a picture for us, and I'm going to turn it over to Nikki in a minute. But before I do that, I wanted to mention the League of Women Voters did a really fabulous report about homelessness in Benton County, and this is the second time that they've done that report. And they use many of these same resources. And the thing that we feel is important that you know about the Daytime Drop-In Center is these are folks who are not housed, they're not staying in shelter for the most part. They're people who are just kind of out there and they're dropping in for resources. And so they may not be counted in the point in time count or any of the other shelter information. So the League of Women Voters said that there was kind of a range of what is the possible minimum of homelessness, 331 people, and that just is strictly based on the point in time count. But the possible maximum and how they arrived at that figure was they used the ratio of unsheltered persons to total persons who are unhoused, which is 48% in Benton County from the PIT count, and also the other resources that we've included here. And then the result was estimated annual count of unsheltered homeless population that did not rely on school district or Benton County Health Department data. And that's important because the Benton County Health Department and the school district have a different definition of homelessness. For housing programs, homeless is literally homeless. People who are living in situations that are not meant for human habitation, people who are camping, people who are living in cars. So when the League of Women Voters did their study, they felt that the maximum likely number of people who are homeless in the county is 1,266. So that's quite the range from 331 to 1,266. But I'll just also tell you that that comports with a lot of the thinking of most of the advocates out there across the nation about homelessness, that the point in time count should really be multiplied by at least 3 or 4 to get the total number of people who really are homeless in the community. The League of Women Voters did not break down the ratios as far as the race and ethnicity or the vulnerabilities, but they did look at all the potential factors that created a total number. So I'll turn it back to you, Julie.
Thank you so much for that, Peggy. Do we have any questions from our board members specifically about what Peggy just shared? There will also be a time for questions at the end.
I have a observation, I think, or at least maybe this is a question for Peggy. You were talking about minimum and maximum, but as I understand that data, those are counting two different things. The point in time count is how many people can be counted on a single day in a year, whereas the other numbers, the maximum numbers, how many people might be homeless during the course of a whole year.
Yeah, very good point, Jim, because, thank you, dear. Oh, thank you. My husband's delivering a gourmet dinner to me that he cooked. Because the Daytime Drop-In Center collects their data over an entire year, and they're very confident that they don't have duplicated counts, which is not necessarily the case with the other information that we're looking at. We try not to have duplicated counts, but it's up to people to self-disclose whether they've participated. And you're absolutely right. We're looking at kind of a snapshot in time as compared to an entire year.
So Peggy, this is Alita. Just a little clarification.
Yeah.
We have really good data of unique individuals that have come to the drop-in. Not all of them are homeless, but we do count each person as a unique individual. But we do participate also in the point in time count. And we get we turn in a plethora of the numbers whenever they collect that data. And
thank you very much for that correction, Alita.
And then Jim, also, they've extended it. It's not just one point in time. Now it goes over about 3 or 4 days and allow almost a week.
Thank you for the
I should clarify that on the point in time count. Theoretically, it's 1 day in that week, but we do the collection over several days because it's simply impossible with manpower to be able to do it all on 1 day. But it's very carefully, again, like I said, people are being asked, have you participated in one of these surveys previously? And the shelter sites all turn in their information, and then there are the people who are on the streets. And so we try to look for any possible duplication in that.
All right. Thank you, Peggy. I'm going to hand it over to Nikki to go over the data that Alita and Allison and all of her volunteers and team collect at the Daytime Drop-In Center, because Nikki put together these lovely slides.
Okay, thanks, Julie, Peggy. So this is, as we said, for the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center, which you'll see on this slide here is the only resource center available during the day in Benton County. So as you can see, they had 852 unique interactions, unique individuals, and almost 4,000 connections throughout that year. So what the bars that are most important to notice on these next couple slides are the two on the far right, the green and the red. So this is for the white population, and you can see that there is not a disparity. There's not an overrepresentation of white folks that are also homeless as compared to those in Benton County. You can see the same thing here with an Asian. There's not really a disparity in this population either. You do start to see disparities here for Black population. You can see it's pretty stark difference, as well as for American Indian, Native American. We see a disparity here as well. And then also with Pacific Islander Hawaiian.
Oh.
And then this is sort of the last grouping of other multiracial, multicultural, and you can see once again that we do have a disparity.
So this is a slide that I threw in here, Nikki, right after we talked, because I got some information from the Philomath Gleaners. So do you want to go over this, or would you like me to?
No, you can go for it.
Okay. Well, we are lucky enough to have Catherine Biscoe from the Philomath Gleaners on our board, and she called to make sure we had this information. And just to make sure that We see in Monroe and Philomath that we are also having families and individuals experiencing homelessness, and specifically from the Monroe Food Pantry and the Monroe Gleaners. Janice Cook, who works down there, she verified that of her 46 families, nearly all of them are caring for someone elderly, are disabled, or have comorbidities. And we don't have that same kind of data from Philomath, although Catherine wants to collect it going forward. But we do know that her numbers have significantly gone up during COVID. She consistently had served 85 families, and their full membership that they might serve over a given year is 143 families. But right now, consistently, every week, they are feeding 124 families in Philomath. I wanted to be sure to include that. You can go ahead and do the conclusions, Nikki.
Yeah, so this is very similar to what Peggy said earlier, but based on this data that we have initially, you can see that we have pretty substantial racial and ethnic disparities, particularly for Native American and Black populations. And we also have the disparity for different vulnerability factors. So we talked about veteran status, disability, and LGBTQ, which also have higher rates of homelessness and housing insecurity. And then, as we talked about in the beginning, they also, homeless and housing insecure populations experience a lot of safety concerns, not having a house, not being able to secure themselves or their possessions, not having access to clean hygiene, a washing station, a toilet, a shower, as well as for heating and cooling, so not being able to be in a place where they can have good regulation of temperature. And then also domestic violence, which we'll talk about as well a little bit later.
All right, thank you for the recap. Can I ask someone at home, Peggy, I'm looking at you, would you please email George Grosh the link to the meeting from the calendar invite? I think he's having difficulties joining. Thank you. I wanted to also highlight that Andrea Myrie chatted that the ALSI Food Bank would likely have data, and we did not get in touch with them at the data group, and we were trying to do quite a bit in a short amount of time, but I would like to reach out to them and see what their numbers are and ALSI as well going forward. So I'm going to be covering some of the transitional housing data. The data that we have here in Benton County for transitional housing comes from COI, Community Outreach. Corvallis Housing First, which could be transitional, but also could serve as permanent housing for some individuals, depending on the client. And then just since mid-April, we have had a small number of micro shelters in Corvallis that are also serving as transitional housing. So I'm going to go over the numbers from them. And it's all compared to the general population in Benton County from the US Census. So here is COI's data. And Benton County is the blue bar, and COI's population is the red bar. So we have an underrepresentation for white individuals at COI and an overrepresentation for Hispanic or Latino or African American. There's a slight overrepresentation for people who are Asian as well. Disability is where we see some pretty stark contrasts. The overall population with a disability in Benton County, I think it was 7%, but at COI, it's over 60%. So people in transitional housing here are suffering with disabilities at a far higher rate. For the LGBTQ population, COI has a disproportionate representation for LGBTQ members of our community in transitional housing. And then with children. COI also hosts families with children, so there is an overrepresentation of children at COI. Our veterans are also housed at COI in a larger share than in our general population. And for medical fragility, you can see that quite a few people, over half of the people at COI are medically fragile. Fleeing domestic violence. Compare that to the numbers from our H.O.P.E data, which estimate that 4% of people in Benton County are experiencing domestic violence, whereas at COI, it's almost half fleeing domestic violence. Then from Corvallis Housing First and Andrea Myrie, thank you for this. We have an overrepresentation slightly for Black individuals and 3 times over for Native American individuals, and that's dating back to 2017. Then with the micro-shelter data, there were only 23 individuals in 11 micro-shelters, so we don't have a lot of data, and they did not have race and ethnicity data. But the data that they do have, I'll show you in a chart. These are just a couple of photos of what a micro-shelter looks like. If we put that data in a chart form, you can see with disabilities, serious health conditions, and mental health conditions, and veterans, they are disproportionately present. I'm reading something in the chat for just a second. Are the churches or Catholic charities who serve people collecting any data? Lori, I don't know how to answer that question, but I can follow up with you offline. And thank you, Peggy, for sending George the link. Okay. So the conclusions to draw from this, as you saw visually, we have racial and ethnic disparities for Black, Hispanic, and Native American individuals in transitional housing. We have highly vulnerable populations, an overrepresentation of disabilities, veterans, individuals who are LGBTQ, who are medically vulnerable and have mental health issues, and then safety concerns with fleeing domestic violence. And I believe that is it for my portion. Are there any questions from our board? I'm not seeing any in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Joel to go over some of the data that we have on safety from a first responder perspective. Joel, are you ready?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So a couple of things to bring up. The first one is that we do not track people based on their housing status. We do not track people based on their sexual orientation, their marital status, their income level, their student status. In fact, we're very limited in things that we can ask because they have to be related to the investigation that we're conducting. So typically the information we have is a name, date of birth, you know, some basic physical descriptors because those are relevant. If we are issuing a citation or arresting somebody, we'll ask them their address. If they say they don't have one, we will mark down, you know, transient or whatever the appropriate thing is on the citation. They may give us a mailing address. If they have an ID card, because a lot of things are electronic now, so if we enter that as an electronic citation, it will pop up with whatever address is on the ID card or driver's license, which may be an old address or it may be a mailing address. So we don't track people based on their housing status. So I recognize that would be a good way to develop some data, but it's not possible and it's not probably ethical for us to do that as a law enforcement agency. Whereas other service providers, that's necessary for them. So that's sort of one caveat. The data that we can sort of share that might provide some representation is the data you see in the slide here, which is about posting illegal campsites. The important thing to note with that is that we are complaint driven. We do not have officers out looking for campsites. We are complaint driven. Somebody calls and complains that somebody's camping on public property. Obviously, it's our job to respond to that complaint. If we receive chronic complaints in an area, we may not wait for somebody to call because we receive chronic complaints, but we are complaint driven. It's not something that we're sending officers out, you know, searching every corner of the city to find folks. So with those two caveats in mind, we can share that in 2018, Corvallis Police Department posted a total of 305 campsites for illegal camping in public. Of those, only 30 citations were issued. So that's not necessarily consistent with what some people perceive, because we recognize that it's not necessarily a police issue, it's a social issue. So issuing citations isn't necessarily the best solution, which is why we don't issue citations every single time. In 2019, that number increased. to 400 campsites posted for illegal camping in public. Although the number of citations issues was down, both as a number itself and as a ratio to just 23 citations. So again, from a police department perspective, we're trying to find solutions, and we recognize that for most folks, issuing a citation for this is not necessarily the best solution. But in some cases, that sort of seems to be the route we need to go down. I'll share some information from the fire department. Brian wasn't able to be here to share it himself. Unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to discuss it, so I can't provide any further insights other than sort of what's on here. But the fire department looked at 6 specific locations where people experiencing homelessness often congregate for periods of time. Of those locations, those 6 specific locations, just for 2019, they noted 39 fire calls, 98 EMS calls, for a total of 137 calls. And that sort of is a little different for the police department as well, because although we can provide data on how many people, how many campsites were posted for illegal camping, since we don't and can't track housing status, it's not really possible. And we've been asked, it's not possible for us to sort of provide a greater showing of the impact of the behaviors of some people who are homeless, because some people who are homeless obviously engage in behaviors that have an impact on the community that involve the police department. But since we can't and don't track housing status, we can't provide data on that impact as well. Fire department, I think, is also a little bit limited based on conversations that I've had, because a lot of medical type calls are protected by HIPAA, so they can't release a lot of data beyond that, beyond probably just some very basic numbers. So it may also be difficult for them to give any more demographics beyond that. So if anybody has any questions about hopefully just the CPD stuff, since I don't know as much about the fire department stuff, I'd be happy to answer those.
So Joel, this is Peggy McGuire, and I do have a question. Many moons ago, and working with a different police department, I was able to see calls for service to particular addresses, and it wasn't identified like who the people were, but it seems like one of the issues that has come before the H.O.P.E board a number of times are citizens concerned about the volume of police calls to a particular address where either people have congregated or there's a nearby issue. So the one that I keep hearing about is the Christmas tree farm. And so isn't it possible that regardless of whether we know that these people are homeless or not, that we could make some kind of conclusions or draw some kind of conclusions if we did some sort of police calls for service to particular addresses?
We can certainly look at specific addresses. It appears that that's what the fire department did. I don't know sort of their rationale for which addresses they picked, if they've had questions about those in the past. I think in the broadest sense, the greatest impact in terms of law enforcement, again, is the behaviors of a small group of people who are homeless. And that's not necessarily tied to a specific address. Some addresses more than others, of course, if it's somewhere where folks are camping, but we have camping data as well. So that is sort of the challenge from a data standpoint with the police department is, how do we select an address? We could select downtown, for example, but not all the misbehavior in downtown is homeless folks. It could be college students or, professionals or what have you. So it's difficult to geographically narrow it down beyond that. We can track the type of offenses. Obviously livability is important to our community. So we track that and we share that information. Nobody is probably going to be surprised if I say that areas near campus tend to have more livability issues, and downtown tends to have more livability issues. But again, trying to find the root cause of that. We don't track student status either. So of course, if it's near campus, that'd be pretty easy speculation, but we can't necessarily guarantee that 100% of the calls related to that are because of that specific group of community members.
Oh, sure, 100% understood, and I appreciate that response. I mean, obviously, if it's downtown, it could be students acting crazy around the bars, whatever. But I think that, you know, in talking with Brian and listening to how they were gathering data, that was kind of the approach they took. Kind of some areas that are known camping areas is what they used as the addresses.
Yeah, and I think that approach is probably addressed with the data that we are able to provide about illegal camping, because that's a specific offense. So it kind of doesn't tie itself to a location because it's the offense. So citywide, that's what we've done. And it might be important to note as well that there, to my knowledge, there is no ordinance prohibiting camping in the county. So outside of the city of Corvallis, if somebody's on public property, that's might be trespassing or some other offense. So that data is not included. This is just within the city limits. But in terms of the actual illegal camping as an offense, you know, that's all captured there. But if we're talking about drinking in public or human waste or disorderly conduct or things like that, that's just not really possible for us to separate that out.
And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to monopolize this, but I think that that's the piece that is helpful for this group, because when we're thinking about everybody's safety across the board, I think that it's informative to us to help understand, like, you know, were some of these mental health crises, were they related to drug and alcohol abuse? And that might help us understand, like, what services to bring to people that where there may be a gap right now that people can't access those type of services because they don't exist or because they're not being connected up properly or whatever.
Right. And I think that, not to beat a dead horse too much here, but you know, that from a law enforcement perspective, that this is a small but chronic group of folks that are sort of have a high impact on our community. Our officers recognize that just because somebody is homeless doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to go out and do things that impact the community. But some folks who are homeless do quite a bit of damage, if you will, to our community. And alcohol, drugs, mental health definitely factors in that. But from a law enforcement perspective, not things that we can track, even though it might be valuable data. In fact, there's actually case law about, for example, if I stop somebody in a car, I can't expand the scope of that stop to ask questions that aren't related unless there's a very specific reason for that. So especially if it is a protected class, I literally can't, even if it might be helpful information to gather. And we've worked with OSU to try to address student behaviors in the past, and they've asked similar questions. For a lot of stuff, we literally cannot ask it.
Thank you, Joel. And I think the data from Samaritan and from our homeless service providers showing the substance use disorders and mental illness and disability and fleeing domestic violence, that really rounds out the picture of the safety concerns that individuals themselves are having, and how the safety concerns for the whole community are really interconnected with behavioral health diagnoses for this population. Are there any other questions for Joel before we move on? Yeah, Jan?
One quick question, Joel. What's the protocol when you write a citation or you whatever it is, you ask for an address, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then you provide in the daily log. There's the Corvallis daily police log, which is kind of a new thing.
Yes.
If it says no fixed address, that, can you say that that's somebody who is homeless?
Well, so the the public police log that's on the police department's webpage,
yeah,
that's highlights from the shift. At the end of a shift, the shift supervisor, and we've been doing this piece for years, where they go over the highlights, and that's distributed to other supervisors and managers in the department, just so that everybody has an understanding of sort of what's going on. And in the interest of transparency, we've begun sharing that. Sort of the difference is that that's not a complete accounting of all the activity. It's not a complete accounting of all the citations that have been issued or actions that have been taken. It's sort of a less formal, overview of some of the highlights. So if for example, we contact somebody, we'll just use downtown as example, contact somebody downtown, they have an open container of alcohol, and they're issued a citation, the officer may recognize that that person is homeless, but what goes into the report is what goes on the citation. So the citation itself may say, maybe the address for community outreach or the drop-in center or old mailing address from years ago. And that's what goes in the report. So the shift highlights isn't a complete or searchable document in that regard compared to the actual police report, which is going to have that official mailing address. So if the court needed to contact the person, that's where they would send the mail to.
And just so this group knows, one of the educational topics that will likely be at the next meeting or the September meeting is going to be from Joel doing a training on well, Joel, you tell me what the training would be on.
I think that a lot of people don't necessarily understand sort of the process, especially with illegal camping, with what the police department does. So I was going to share that. If other board members have other questions or specific things that they would like me to make sure that I cover, I would be happy to do that. Because I know there's a lot of maybe some misunderstanding and some misconceptions about what the police department does and how we approach homelessness. I think that I would imagine that just the data that we shared about how many camps were posted may be a surprise to some people. I think the low ratio of citations is probably a surprise to some people. So the better we can do at sharing our procedures, I think would be the better for everyone involved.
Thanks, Joel.
I had a quick question for Joel.
Sure, Nikki and then Zan.
Just briefly on what you talked about there, what is the difference? So when you had on the previous slide about you had this many illegal camping notices and then, only 23 citations, I guess what is I don't know what that difference is between those.
Right. Totally legitimate question. Hopefully we won't skip too far ahead to the next time, but if we get an illegal camping complaint, we go out and we post a notice. Just really briefly, the notice says, here you're violating city ordinance by camping here. Here are some resources. Essentially, that you have X amount of time before we could potentially enforce the ordinance. And then we would come back after that time has expired before we would issue any citations. So posting the notice is not an arrest. It's not a citation. There's no fine. There's no fee. If somebody received such a notice and picked up all their stuff and left by the next day, that would be it. So does that answer your question? Hopefully?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Just throw a quick thing in here too. I think that this is such an important piece, Joel, that we've asked the police, we globally have asked the police, not to try to disturb some of the camps, because that's the only way that we're able to kind of control where people are going and get them sanitation services and prevent the spread of COVID. So we're really grateful to the police for being thoughtful about that. And I'm sorry I butted in on Zan's time.
Thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge that while HIPAA, the Health Information Protection Act, can be a barrier, especially to sharing in this type of setting, it is possible if there are clear intergovernmental agreements between law enforcement and, say, our behavioral health department and Samaritan Health Services, for those entities to share data on people either de-identified or for special purposes, for in order to deliver services. And one of the things that I have really been wanting to get us to do is to clearly identify and prioritize that small group of people that are very challenging to the community, so that we can address their needs first and hopefully minimize some of these issues in the community. But we haven't quite gotten there yet. So that is something that this group could definitely recommend. We need to have that short list. We need to address the problems.
Well, and actually at next month's meeting, when Joel's group presents on different model systems, there likely will be a portion about that kind of collaboration and what a successful model looks like. Joel found a model called the hub and spoke model, where all the different spokes in the community come together to a hub, and it doesn't require new resources. It requires a coming together of what we already have. So he's gonna, hopefully, Joel, present on that next month.
Absolutely.
Okay, Jan, I think you are unmuted. I can hear you clacking away. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and screen share again, and we will get back to the presentation. Nikki, I think you are up with vulnerable populations, and I'll just introduce it real quick. With a lot of the data we've already shared with you, it doesn't include children. And so although there are some children at COI, when we're looking at our PIT count and men's and women's shelter and Corvallis Housing First, children are not included in that. And I think we all agree that children are a vulnerable population. And so we're doing a whole separate section just on children, and these are the areas where we got data. And Nikki, I'll hand it off to you.
Great, thank you. All right, so do you want me to list them, or do you want to go to the next slide here?
Well, yeah, I think everybody, well, for people on the phone, go ahead and read them.
Okay, great. So we're gonna go over data from the Jackson Street Youth Center, or Youth Shelter, as well as the Transitional Housing Program. And then we have some school data, which is called the McKinney-Vento data, which is mostly from Corvallis, but we also have some from Philomath and some of the rural school districts in Alsea and Monroe. And then finally, we're going to talk about Lynn Benton Community College, which is primarily young adults. So we're getting a little bit older here as we go along. All right, so for the Jackson Street Youth Shelter, they serve 18 to 25-year-olds. And this is from their 2019 data. They had 78 homeless clients and 49 unstably housed. And we're going to be comparing that with the Benton County 2019 census data.
I'm going to chime in just real quick. Their shelter is for kids who are under 18, and then their transitional housing is for that transition age youth from 18 to 25. So this does include data about children.
Thank you.
No, you're fine.
Okay, so this first slide, I don't know if you can tell on the bottom there, but this is for just white. And you can see here that we do not have any disparate and overrepresentation of white that are homeless or unstably housed. And then here we have a greater breakdown, and you can really start to see the disparity here with Black as well as Native American, especially with unstably housed, which is that orange bar. And then Hawaiian Pacific Islander, you can also see there's a pretty stark disparity, particularly for homeless. Asian is kind of on par. And then we also have this unknown, so we can't really speak to that one. For ethnicity here, you can also see that we have the disparity. So the red and the yellow bars are what we're looking at, and you can see that it's far greater than the Benton County population. And as well for disability, there's also a greater disparity for homeless and unstably housed. And LGBTQ as well. So once again, for the Benton County, we're using larger state data, which is about 5% for LGBTQ in the general population. And you can see that here for the unstably housed, those that list themselves as unstably housed, it's almost 85% that identify as LGBTQ, and about a quarter of those identified as homeless also were LGBTQ. And in this one, it's important to look at the red pie slice and the bright yellow one. And so this is for fleeing domestic violence. And once again, we have that base number of 4% in Benton County. And then you can see that 15% of those that were listed as homeless were also fleeing domestic violence, and 18% of those unstably housed were also fleeing domestic violence. So almost a five times increase there.
Nikki, can I just throw something in here? I read a data point today that calls on child abuse to child abuse hotlines are down 50% across the nation. And what they attribute that to is that teachers and other individuals that interact with the young people are not able to actually see them physically, and they're the ones who are most likely to be the reporters, that the young people themselves would try to flee the situation or simply be stuck there.
Yeah, thank you. That's good. It's good to know. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Benton County School District data, and this is for the 2018-2019 data that we have. So it's basically the same message you can see again with the race. We don't have a disparity with white students, but you start to see it with the Hispanic, Black, and Native American. And the disability is also pretty stark. So of those that identify as homeless, it's almost 18% that have a disability, whereas it's only about 8% in Benton County. And this is for Philomath, which is an even greater disparity here, that half of the homeless students that in Philomath also identify as having a disability. And another interesting observation that we have is that homelessness for rural students is actually increasing. So you can see here, Alcee and Monroe are on the left side, and you can see both of those rates of homelessness increasing, whereas Corvallis and Philomath are kind of staying steady or even decreasing. And we're not sure, obviously, why that is, but this is the info we have so far.
And Nikki, this is Barbara. On that previous slide, I just want to point out to people that Corvallis was the only one that provided us data for the 2019-2020 academic year.
Great, thank you. Okay, and then we're transitioning to a little bit older population with Lynn Benton Community College, and they had a little over 550 participants. And of those, over half had experienced housing insecurity in the past year, and almost 20% had experienced homelessness in the past year. So this is the racial breakdown, and you can see the same pattern that we've seen. So there's not a great disparity for white, but there is for Black, American Indian, Native, and Asian in this population, which is also including the Pacific Islander. So this is a little bit different than the data we've seen earlier where that's broken out separately. This is a, conglomeration of all Asian, which is a pretty broad category. And what was really nice is they actually broke out between LGB and transgender. So you can see here that the Benton County LGBTQ is everyone, in that group altogether, which was about 5%. So it would probably be even more skewed if that was just taken out to be transgender population. So you can see that 80% of those that identified as housing insecure were transgender, which is pretty extreme. And again, for sexual orientation, all of these brightly colored bars are non-heterosexual individuals, and you can see that there is a great disparity between those that identify and then just LGBTQ in Benton County. And again, here with veteran, we have a bit of a disparity, especially for housing insecure. There's a greater representation of those in the military or veteran status. And disability, once again, the same thing, where we're seeing an overrepresentation of those that identify with disability. And this is also broken out between chronic illness, learning disability, physical disability, and a psychological disorder. So when you have the slides by yourself later, you can go back and look and see the pretty stark differences between those. So as has been kind of the message of the day, you can see that we have pretty extreme racial and ethnic disparities for homeless individuals and housing insecure in children and young adults. And also that we have the same highly vulnerable populations with transgender, LGB, veteran status, and disability, as well as with domestic violence. And then to reiterate about the school sources, we also see that young children and transition age are experiencing the same racial and ethnic disparities and vulnerabilities. And also with that observation again, that homelessness for children in rural Benton County is on the rise.
Okay, thank you so much, Nikki. I think our next portion is the housed population that I'm going to go over. So I'll ask our board, are there any questions for Nikki about the data on children?
No, I want to throw in a quick thing about the veterans. So sorry, again, I'm not trying to monopolize this conversation, but we hear a lot of anecdotal information. And what we're learning about our veteran population is that oftentimes they come back from their military service and they kind of have some options available to them with family members, so that even if they don't have their own specific housing, they have places where they can stay. But as time goes on and some of the issues that they're dealing with, mental health issues, the emotional health issues, that they blow through their array of options and then end up homeless. So again, there are veteran services assistance, but it takes a while for people to kind of access that.
Thanks, Peggy. Any other questions from our board? I'm seeing a chat. Give me just a second here. Andrea, did you want to chime in and share that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Philomath has had a concerted effort to house homeless students over the last couple of years. So that might be why their population of homeless students has gone down as an overall percentage. So yeah.
Thank you.
I wanted to make an observation, and it's probably qualitative, but that is that having been unstably housed or homeless as a child or youth seems to be one of the most significant risk factors for being homeless as an adult.
Thanks, Ann.
I have a question, and you said this at the beginning of this whole presentation, Julie, but I forgot. How are you, for the purposes of all this data, defining housing insecure?
It's defined differently by the different providers, and so we really didn't get into the nitty-gritty of it for this presentation. It's more to show the racial and ethnic disparities and safety issues and vulnerability factors without splitting hairs over what it means to be housing insecure, because HUD has their definition, another provider might have theirs.
If I can just throw in, Jim, the information that we've been able to provide from CSC are people who came in saying, we're about to lose our housing, we need help.
Okay, so another way of putting it, though, is that housing insecurity for the purposes of this data is not covering people who are spending more than half of their income on rent.
It could. You could have someone who is spending that much on their rent and they are housing insecure, about to lose their housing. So it's not clearly.
But it's not covering that whole universe of people that are.
No.
Okay, thanks.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the housed population to try to give some comparison data, because we spent a lot of time on our end of the housing spectrum that's emergency and transitional. So we do have some data from CSC because they have their homeless prevention program. So just like Peggy said, these are people who are housed, who are coming to CSC for help so they can remain housed. And then Lynn Benton Housing Authority has vouchers, so their voucher population data. And then Jan got some great data from the CDBG recipients about how many people are housing cost burdened and rent burdened that we wanted to share if we had time, and it looks like we're going to. So I love this slide, and Carla at CSC, who works with Peggy, put this together. And you can see in the light blue at the bottom, the representation that we should have for Black, Native American, Pacific Islander, and Hispanic. And in red, the representation that we have for homeless individuals. And in the gray, the representation we have for people who have vouchers. And then with yellow, the people who are unstably housed. Those are who are seeking help from CSC to prevent falling into homelessness. And I think it's a really nice comparison to see how much more we see a racial disparity with our Native American and Black population in homelessness. So this is the data that Jan got, and the first slide here is households that are cost burdened. So that could be you own your own home or you're renting. The next slide will be just renters. But you can see that the gray bar is people who are spending a third to half of their income on rent. And then the orange bar, people are spending more than half, and that's that population you're talking about, Jim. And then the black line with the triangles is the number of households we're talking about. Stark racial and ethnic disparities. And on this next slide, these are just renters. So of the 9,000 renters that we have CDBG data from, you can see there are still racial and ethnic disparities for who is cost burdened and housed. So I want to just kind of wrap up here to show this is all the data.
Can I clarify something on the
Sure, Jim.
last slide?
Of course.
I'm pretty sure I'm correct about this, but an earlier slide labeled this data as CDBG recipients. That's not correct. I mean, what this is data from a report that the city of Corvallis has to put together for HUD in order to receive CDBG funds. So this data is of the entire population of Corvallis expressed as all these various numbers and percentages. And it's and the city of Corvallis updates this report annually, and every few years goes in more deeply into it. So this is looking at the, yeah.
That's a very important clarification, and I'm glad I learned that. I'm sorry that I mischaracterized that. So yeah, this would be all of Corvallis then, with 17,000 cost-burdened households and 9,000 rent-burdened households. Thank you so much for that, Jim.
Julie, the county has analogous data available through the Community Health Improvement Plan, so we could provide contrasting data for the entire county if we needed to.
That would be helpful, Zan. Thank you. All right. So just sort of wrapping up all the data that you have been presented and where it falls on our housing spectrum, and how do we prioritize. The data work group came up with this sort of thermometer, you know, green, yellow, or red for extreme disparities, extreme vulnerabilities, and lots of safety issues. We don't have good data on the racial and ethnic disparities for individuals who are in behavioral health crisis and getting responded to, so I just didn't put a color there. But you can see where we are seeing the most extreme racial and ethnic disparities, vulnerable populations, and safety on our housing spectrum. And this is going to help you all as a board to prioritize where you would like to start first. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing because at the end I'll just tell everybody where we are and what we're doing moving forward. But I will stop sharing here and allow for questions and discussion from the board. Any follow-ups about the data that was shared?
I have a comment or two. I just want to, you pointed it out when we first started the PowerPoint, but the differences that, you know, how data is collected and the data sets, and in fact, even the same definition for, you know, mixed race or Hispanic and white, and so on. I think we need to standardize a way of you know, all the slides are different. And I was thinking, you know, maybe we could get a group together that might want to look at a way to start standardizing some of these definitions, some of these categories. I don't know if we end up with 20 or if we end up with 6, but you know, that so that we can find what is it we need, or what if we do find a data that, some data that has a name to it that it's not one of our categories, where does it fit? So in other words, I don't know, this might be too much of a pipe dream to look at standardizing our data sets that we have here, obviously, and then work our way upstream, and this is going to be harder, is to get the groups to standardize their reporting so that we can all get this on the same, well, if it can be on the same page. I don't know if that's realistic. I haven't been in this business long enough to know if that's the case.
A lot of the hard part, Jan, is that the definitions are defined by the funders. So unless you can take the reins at the federal government level and tell them how to define things in a standardized way, some of it's just going to be locked in and different based on the funding stream. But I do know at next month's meeting, when the model systems work group presents, I think that will be part of their presentation is what does a model system do? To use a centralized data system or collaboration, or to coordinate, or to have coordinated entry with a standardized VI SPDAT so that you do have some standardized data points. So that will be a conversation for next month as well.
Great.
Jan, you are singing my song, because my agency puts information into 40 different data systems as of this moment that are dictated by the funders. And we would love to figure out a way to only report into one system. The best that we've been able to come up with is to identify a data mart that extracts things from all the systems and puts it into some kind of Tableau reporting. And I see this as a potential for the future for this group, but but it's distressing that not everybody uses the same data system and the same data sets.
Well, true. I understand. I'm just thinking at this point, for my purposes, if I could code or index or whatever you want to call it, we have these bins, and what goes in this bin, what goes in this bin, what goes in this bin. It could have a different name and it could be from a different funding source, but it goes in this bin. You know what I'm getting at? And so I don't know if that's as necessary, but I think it would make the data a bit clearer, but maybe not. I don't know. So chew on that.
Yeah, everybody thinks their data system is the spectacular one. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And I do know that IHN CCO is working on better comprehensive data systems, or being able to pull data from multiple systems. Bruce, are you on the line and able to give an update about any progress that IHN is making, or is that a conversation for another time?
Well, I can just let you all know that it is, we are in the midst of kind of an IT installation project that should be producing some results by fall.
Is there any way that this group can give feedback or be involved in any kind of help and support in that process?
Certainly, we'd welcome any kind of suggestions on what kinds of things would be most useful from our data.
Yeah, if there's an opportunity for feedback from providers, please share it with this group, because we have so many providers on here who share that same passion. I'm seeing a chat from Lori. And Lori, I think that you might want to get involved to give some community feedback on that topic, as far as integrating systems or on different perspectives with IT. And Anita, you are saying that you have made changes. Do you want to say that to everyone, Anita?
And we just put some new changes in our charting on our computer system in place specifically to do a better job with tracking in the homeless community. And so I'm hoping we'll have good data soon, and that went into effect last week. And then the bigger scope of social determinant of health changes, which Bruce was talking about, will be just around the bend.
Thanks, Anita. George, I think I saw you raise your hand.
Thank you. I have something to say too.
Yeah,
so
go ahead, George.
So nothing in the data should be surprising. And really the surprising thing is if anybody actually thought that Corvallis or Benton County was exempt from the same kind of racial and social injustice that exists across the world. While this data shows it across the country, all this data shows us is it's just as true for us here as it is for anybody else. We could talk about data sources and where money comes from and strategies and how we put these data together, who's the most important. Well, everybody's important. And what we do know is that we know about how many people they are, and we know where they come from, and we know what they're about. And so let's allocate our priorities based on that. We can worry about the granularity of data that we get at another time. Right now, what we're talking about is how do we house and care for the most vulnerable people in our community as quickly and as efficiently and with the most care that we can do. And any arguments about data, and now that data also told me, who are these people? Well, we know who they are. So what are we going to do now is the question I have.
You're getting lots of amens in the chat, George. Yeah, Christina, is that you on the phone? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I can't even see the slides, but I looked at them previously, and I don't see any data from the men's cold weather shelter or room at the inn, any of our emergency shelters. Is there any way that they do have data or we can get data?
There was data shared from the men's shelter and the women's shelter, the room at the inn, about racial and ethnic disparities. That was right in the beginning in Peggy's presentation.
And that was it. It was just the racial and ethnic disparities.
Yeah, that is the best data that we have there. The data on behavioral health diagnoses and disabilities comes from different sources, like the Samaritan and COI.
But nothing where how many people are seen per day, per month.
That was
because I know Alicia had visits or unique interactions, or and I have a question about that. What is unique interactions, or can she define that? And I kind of agree with Jan. It's like all of our data is kind of all out there. And if we could centralize it and, you know, and categorize it, that would be very helpful, because we need that for funding.
Yeah, with the daytime drop-in center data, they do break it down between individuals who are served and then how many times people are served. And Alita, did you want to elaborate on that anymore?
I don't think so, not at this time. We'll be doing our presentation next time, so.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from this board? I can hear you typing again, Jan. It's okay. It sounds very much like a typewriter. It reminds me of my youth. Well, I think George summarized it well. Is what are we going to do with this data? And next month, when we see a presentation from 2 different work groups, one about the current services that we do have and the gaps in those services and the efforts to address those gaps, followed by a presentation on what a model system looks like. I think that's where you all as this board can start to shape where are we going to prioritize based on this data, based on what we have, based on what a model system looks like. And I welcome your discussion on that. You guys have time now if you would like to start the topic of how to synthesize this data moving forward in the next month, or if we need to wait until next month's presentation to really be able to have that conversation.
I just want to jump in and say that, you know, when I look at the areas in our little kind of thermometer range, that these really resonate with me, that these are the areas that there's not a lot of work being done, or there's not a lot of focus on funding. And I don't mean to say that people aren't doing good work. I mean that there's just not support for that work. And so as I look at everything like the behavioral health and the, you know, responses to different things, that and all the red areas, those are the areas that I would say, yeah, absolutely. There is no support for this work. And that's where I would go with it.
What does the rest of the board think? I know it's a lot of information that we just threw at you.
Peggy, can you be?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Let me just ask a follow-up question of Peggy. When you were saying no, could you be more specific about what areas you were referring to? That.
Yeah, I can. I'm trying to find the slide that I want to go back to. And so, like, it's the thermometer slide. There we go, Julie. Thank you. So here are the things that I'm like, here are the areas where we really need to focus our efforts because there's just not enough support. So for example, with people who are dealing with daytime drop-in stuff, a lot of the funding that CSC gets, we can't even give to our daytime drop-in centers because they're not providing overnight shelter. And so that's a giant gap. They're doing so much for the community, and they're seeing so much of these people, so many of these people that we say, oh my gosh, these people need all this help, and there's no way to give them funding. And so that's where I'm going with it, Jim, that I say, look at these red areas and let's figure out how we can address them.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%, Peggy. I think that that's a good way to go forward. The question becomes, and people smarter than me will know this, there need to be ways that we can say, these are the priorities we set. And while there may not be specific funding streams for those priorities at this point in time, then I guess part of our job is to identify new and creative ways to do that. And I'm not sure what they are right off the hand. I've got some ideas, but I'm much more interested in what you all have to say here. But that's not allow funding to drive vision. This is about vision and what's the important thing. Who are the most important people, and how do we get the most service to them as quickly as we can? And we'll figure out the money.
I know Andrea wanted to say something, and then I see Linda. So go ahead, Andrea, and then Linda.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it would be nice to have just a summary of the themes from today's presentation. Like that's, 1 or 2 pages. I don't know if that's possible, but.
I'm taking notes. Yeah, go ahead, Nikki.
Sorry, this is Nikki. I wanted to make a comment about a potential idea for a training for one of our listening sessions. Is that
okay? Let me let Linda go first because she's been waiting, and then we'll get back to you.
So I know that at Room at the Inn, particularly the disability piece is always so incredibly obvious. And so those numbers, recognizing that to respond to people with disabilities can be some of the most expensive assistance. And yet, the thought of how many homeless women we have in our shelter, I'm looking right at the women's shelter, that are in wheelchairs is phenomenal. I'm always like, when I walk in, I'm always shocked. That's one of the most striking pieces that in that puzzle, that, I mean, in those graphs that you showed, that it's just heartbreaking. anyway, and I know the funding for that is so expensive, but anyway, that's just a comment more than anything.
Thanks, Linda. Nikki, did you want to share your idea for training?
Yeah, I just wanted to recommend that maybe we could have some sort of facilitated training on, which I know is a very, popular topic right now, but on anti-racism and moving forward. Just that's something that I'm doing with my current job, and I think it's really important just to have sort of a baseline that we're all kind of getting on the same page, especially now that we've seen the data with such extreme racial and ethnic disparity. And what can we do as the H.O.P.E board moving forward to understand where that's coming from and understand what the barriers and challenges are that we can hopefully make recommendations to address. And even just going off of what Linda mentioned, we could maybe coordinate that with another training on disability and understanding. I know that they have courses at OSU, so maybe we could draw on an instructor from there, but just, what does that actually mean? What are some of the special considerations we might want to have in mind moving forward when we make recommendations?
Thank you, Nikki. I tried very hard to get a speaker on equity at this meeting. OSU's Office of Institutionalized Diversity has so much work to do now, given our current climate of anti-racism and equity work, that they are unable to do this kind of consulting. I reached out to some local consultants, and they don't have the bandwidth to do it. And then we have a new health equity coordinator for Benton County Health Department, Rocio Munoz, and that might become part of her role to be able to consult on this topic. And we've talked about how part of that is an educational training for the board. That's, a one-time 20 to 30 minute thing on maybe some terminology and how to take a racial and equity lens. And then the other part of that is how do we have a consultant give feedback on how to include it throughout the process. And so I'm working on getting a consultant on racial equity to come to a H.O.P.E executive committee to really say, here's how you can include that in your strategizing, in your process, in your community feedback. So that's a high priority. It's become a high priority for everyone right now. And so trainers like that are in demand, but it's definitely something I'm working on, and not just a one-time thing, but an integration throughout the process of what we're doing. Thanks for that feedback.
Friends, the Fair Housing Council of Oregon is going to do a training for Community Services Consortium and all of our partners in the shelter world and a number of our partners in other regions. And they're going to talk about fair housing as it relates to homelessness. And they actually do a lot of this work. So like when I look at these numbers, I'm not shocked. There's a national study that happens every year, or every 10 years, sorry, by HUD about who's experiencing discrimination. And what we know is that people in the Latino community are experiencing discrimination at for every time they try to enter a housing transaction, they are 4 times more likely to be discriminated against. African Americans are 5 times more likely to be discriminated against. In the Native American community, it's every other experience that they have is more likely to be discriminatory. So there's some really interesting information that the Fair Housing Council can bring to this topic.
Thank you, Peggy. I want to make sure to draw everyone's attention to the chat. If you can see it, Nikki has included a training from PBS about anti-racism in education. And even here in Corvallis, the 509J Corvallis School District sponsors a 2 full-day training on courageous conversations beyond diversity. And the county has invested in having county staff attend as well. And I attended this past fall. We had a good handful of county staff go. And I think it's a wonderful thing that we have in our community and something that a lot of different community leaders want to expand access to. But the PBS training is great.
So Julie, this is Alita. Corvallis Sustainability Coalition has so many different arms to it, but there is one of them that has to do with equity. And I think I mentioned it to you before, but I can get you more information to that. But they have some people that go out and help groups like you guys on your council might be able to sit down with them and hear what they do and how they look at things differently. So it's quite a good process, I think.
Who would be the individual to contact on that equity committee?
I'll get you the name. I can't remember. Well, I'm on the group, but there's about 6 of us, and we take different turns talking to different groups.
Thanks, Alita. Barbara, you put something in your chat. Can you share that with us?
Sure. Megan McDonald is a professor at OSU. We wrote a paper together, and her focus is primarily on children with disabilities and adaptive physical abilities. But just off the top of my head, when the conversation, and Nikki, great points that you raised with regards to anti-racism and also training with to raise awareness to some of the constraints of the disabled. The first person I thought of was Megan.
And Nikki has also put in another person at OSU, Stephanie Jenkins, a disability studies instructor. Barbara, if you're able to take notes, would you write down both of those names and the PBS training and the equity for some possible training options for upcoming meetings?
Sure.
Thank you. Zan, I wanted to ask you what OCW COG Aging and Disability Resources does.
Well, the Council of Governments is the federally recognized Aging and Disability Resources Center for Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln counties. And they provide services to prevent elder abuse, for instance, or to respond to calls about elder abuse. And they provide services to seniors, and particularly folks that are aging with disabilities. And I have never seen them at this table, and I don't know how they might be able to engage with us and perhaps provide additional resources. They seem to be mostly reactive and responsive and not proactive in this arena. And I think we're just missing them at the table. They need to be here.
They have a new director, Ryan Vogt, and I'm going to be meeting with him very shortly. I would love to suggest that he join this group.
Awesome.
Thanks, Peggy and Zan. Linda.
I would also say that that's another really obvious thing when you walk into the room at the end, women's shelter, is how many of our homeless women are so much older. And it's just shocking when you have 80-year-olds that are homeless. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. Yeah. I mean, none of it makes sense, but that one is just like, oh my gosh, the shocking piece of that. Yeah.
So Linda, thank you for everything you do. You're an amazing person. And I am so proud that you're part of our community. And I just want to say that that's the thing that we're seeing over and over and over, that there's going to be this giant tsunami of need with people who are elderly because they're on fixed incomes, and they're going to be just thrown out into the world of homelessness.
And again, they come with more expensive needs. And that's what worries me, is that our homeless population is becoming more and more needy. It's not just that, anyway, if you walk into the homeless shelter, it's those are the two characteristics that are the most shocking is the age, and out of 20 people, we have like 5 people that are in wheelchairs. That's just not equal to the normal population, and so those are some really expensive responsibilities to try to move them into a normal life.
And I just want to throw out there for everybody that I had a meeting with a variety of my partners, my colleagues from around the state with Oregon Housing and Community Services. And Oregon Housing and Community Services wants to move all of the homeless shelter operations to quote unquote non-congregate care. That means motel vouchering people, which is crazy expensive. There's very little money for this. This means that they're trying to turn their entire operation into funding non-congregate care shelter. So all of our shelter operations that we have now, they're like, no, that's not the way. That's not the wave of the future. So I am really distressed about like where this is going to go in the future.
Thanks, Peggy.
Well, one of the problems with that type of model of moving away from that is one of the assets is, well, one of the components that you have to think about is community. Community is a piece of sustainability. And I'm not sure that just providing a hotel kind of places will have that component. It might, but anyway.
Well, Linda, that's what I think your group will look at next month. And Linda actually can't be here next month at our meeting, but her group is going to present on model systems and what does make them successful. And I think, you know, successful models like tiny home villages, it's that communal gathering spot or community garden that keeps people, you know, successfully housed in those areas. I wanted to make sure that what Andrea is saying is seen by Peggy. Peggy, if you're meeting with the COG representative, Andrea, can you share your perspective on how services have been very difficult to obtain?
I was just trying to make a point without dominating anything. Senior disability services has been a barrier for serving our individuals who are older, chronically homeless, need home health, need other services. It's just been a battle. And not to make a comment on their staff or anything, it's, you know, they might be working under some restrictions, but it's almost like they're working to rule people out instead of rule them in. And so I don't know what's going on there, but that's got to stop. The other thing is that we have a couple grants to do case management outreach to people that are 55 and over, and we've served 70 people so far this year who are 55 and up. And also, if you're 55 and homeless, you're really like 65 or 70 or 80 physiologically. And that was a concern that was brought up at the HUD conference that I went to in California last year. So,
hey, Andrea, when I get together with Ryan, the new director of the COG, maybe you'd like to be a part of that conversation. I think this is really important information.
I don't know if you want me along on that first introduction.
Oh, I don't know.
I'm
Come
charming.
on,
I can be nice and say it, but yeah, it's a problem.
I'm not sure I can be nice and say it, so
yeah,
you might be welcome.
It's a huge issue. So.
Well, and I also think, Andrea, if you just phrase it as, here's the factual experience we're having. We have seniors, they need help. They're not getting resources from your program. How do we work on that?
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah. All right. Well, Linda, do you have more? Go ahead.
One last thing.
No, it's fine.
What also is curious, and I don't know where you could get some data for this, but you know, why is homelessness leading to some of these disabilities, especially that you know, does homelessness more likely lead you to being in a wheelchair? I mean, that would be a fascinating question to find out. Because if homelessness, chronic homelessness, we recognize that they're aging so much quicker, as you just said, Peggy. I don't know that I've ever seen any numbers about their health consequences of homelessness. And as they're aging and getting older, and that it cost will be more and more, it would be interesting to see if that could be a motivation for prevention as well. So,
Linda, there's a good article I could send you.
Can you share it with me too, Andrea? And that's where, Bruce, I'm glad you're involved in this conversation because a huge part of healthcare is prevention. And I wonder if IHN is looking at your medically disabled Medi-Medi population, the Medicaid, Medicare population, at housing them before they get so disabled that they live in your ER. Do you have any information to share on that?
Well, we have certainly a lot of active case management and care coordination initiatives going on with that, with the dual eligible population. According to our care plans that we put together for CMS. Housing to date, as is the case with a lot of Medicare and Medicaid programs, it's very tricky to weave that in, and we're certainly looking at ways to do that, but I couldn't say that we've got, the magic bullet at this point.
Hey, sorry, I just have to say, if our zip code can dictate what our health outcomes are going to be, like, how can this not be true?
And Peggy, Andrea put a link in the chat for the special populations and older adults. Linda, I love your emojis of thumbs up and clapping. Linda's got the best emojis. Jan, go ahead.
I was just hoping that that could be put in the minutes.
What part?
The link. The link.
Paula, are you able to see the link in the chat? All the links, actually, because there was a PBS training. You get all those?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Paula. Well, knowing that next month you will have a presentation on our current system and the gaps and on a model system, what more does this group want to ask each other as far as what should be included in next month's presentation? Now that you've seen this data, what questions do you want answered from the model system group that they could bring to you all?
This is Nikki. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Nikki.
It might already be what they're doing, but if for the model housing, if it has, I'm assuming this is an actual case study of something that is working, or no?
There will be sort of a higher level like model system. So like, what does a successful system look like a nationally recommended system?
Okay.
And then they will be presenting a specific system in a certain location and saying,
Okay.
here's how it has been successfully implemented. And then likely also another example of a model framework for collaboration.
Okay. I would be interested in that, which might already be included, but having that breakdown of is this balancing out the inequities that we see for racial and ethnic and disability and that sort of thing. So is it, is it getting across on all fronts?
Thank you, Nikki. And I think that's sort of the same question that I'm asking myself after seeing all this data, and that we can talk about in that work group is, are there any successful models of addressing the racial and ethnic disparities? What are the successful systems for Native American populations? What are the successful systems for doing outreach for a Black community? So I think that might be something to add to this discussion.
Right, because I imagine that those would be different solutions. I think so.
Jan, did you have something you wanted to say, or Bruce, you are unmuted?
This is Jan. I just wanted to say that I'm going to go back and look at the 10-year modified 10-year plan. I know that when we have problems, the going to the mode where the process improvement mode, plan, do, check, act. We may not, if we're going to see any improvement, we need to come up with a baseline on some of these things. And I'm not sure that we have a clear baseline. I'm going to be looking at the data a little closer to see if I can linearize it myself for my benefit. And then, because I still, we have this slide with all the red squares. I'm not sure which red square is most important and how to gauge which one is most important. I know that we're, it's a impact and other things like that. So anyway, I have to chew on this a while, and I'll be referencing some of the documents.
And I think that's also where the model systems comes into play, because in some model systems, you might have a navigation center that serves as your daytime resource center and also has shelter beds and also has case management and coordinated entry. And so for, 2 or 3 of those columns, you are serving that population with behavioral health care and coordinated intake, and it's a drop-in center, and there's some shelter beds, which solves this problem I didn't know about, Peggy, that you need to have some overnight shelter beds to fund a navigation center. Did I hear that right? Yeah.
Wow.
And so that's why CSC can't fund the daytime drop-in center. I learned that today. Thank you for that. And so if a successful model and a successful funding model is that you co-locate this, then that's how I think we look at where the data shows we need to prioritize and where that fits into a model system.
Hey, Julie, just a thought about that. So this is where I keep going back and back and back to Oregon Housing Community Services and say, hey, you need to rethink this, because these are people who are doing really important things and you're preventing us from helping them. It doesn't necessarily make a difference, because they probably think I'm some giant crackpot anyway, but the reality is that it's not working well. The entire system is not working well.
You're our crackpot, Peggy, though. We love you. I'm kidding.
And I saw Peggy's remark that all red squares are important, and I agree. But they're all red boxes to me, and at this point. Even though I got all the data and I sat through the presentation, I still need to line it out.
One comment, I mean, maybe this is a question, especially if the data work group does a little more work, I suppose, but someone earlier had mentioned having a summary would be useful. I guess what I would add to that is that many of the slides we looked at today were dealing with percentages of various sorts. 50% of 4 people is 2, 50% of 100 people is 50, and those are very different animals. And so in some of the topics that we covered today, I didn't get a sense of the scale of whatever it was that was being measured. And so I think if we're gonna, a disparity can be very great, but it can affect a small number of people. A disparity can be very great can be even greater, that affects a large number of people, and I need to know the difference between those things. And I think as we figure out priorities, one of the things that I'm certainly going to be weighing is what is the potential impact of doing this or doing that. You know, I tend to favor greater impact than small impact in general. So,
Hey,
but it's
Jim,
something I'd like to get a better feel for.
Jim, I agree with what you're saying, but like in Benton County, we're talking about small populations anyway. And so like I feel uncomfortable saying, oh, if we're just talking about, you know, 2 or 3 Black people, you know, what's the big deal? So I think that looking at the totality of the percentages is important.
Well, I wouldn't have ever said what you just said, Peggy. But I still say that if we're going to make a big difference on homelessness,
Sorry, I'm not trying to disparage you.
If we're going to make a big difference in addressing homelessness, then we have to be thinking about scale as well.
I think that's a good perspective, Jim. And I think we kept it to just percentages for, you know, the reverse of, you know, we might only have 40 households that are, you know, Hawaiian Pacific Islander, but half of them can't pay the rent. And then versus, you know, how many individuals are we talking about at the daytime drop-in center when there's about 850 people? And, you know, however many of them are of a certain race or ethnicity. So I do think that rounds out the discussion of impact, even though it doesn't take away from the disparities from the percentages. So data work group, Peggy, you might not be dead. We might want to look at that again and see what numbers we can pull so that we can make some conclusions about impact.
Can I chime in on a question? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Reese.
The data looked great and there was a lot of data. I noticed a lot of it was racial or ethnic data. And I saw the takeaway, of course, disability, age, family. I just was always under the impression, and certainly training on this would be helpful, but that you can't, that it would be unethical to prioritize something based on race or ethnicity. So to take the data that there's more you know, Pacific Islanders, and to do the data is great to have for awareness, but to actually do something with that data to prioritize something, it gets complicated for me. And maybe that's as far as you can go, is just awareness of the data.
I would like to chime in on that. I think that there are things that we can clearly do. One is support education for landlords. Because the Fair Housing Act is pretty specific about what you can and can't do, and discrimination is illegal. So there is a need for more outreach and education to people that rent to folks in the community or sell homes. So realtors are another target audience. It's not necessarily our work to do, but it's certainly something we can recommend and promote. The other element is that I think we need to reach out to the associations and organizations that work with those populations, whether it's the NAACP or the tribes locally or other groups, to increase the size of our tent and make sure that those folks are addressed in culturally appropriate ways. It's not that we are going to necessarily focus on that group, you know, which may, as Jim pointed out, only have 4 people in it, but we need to be aware of it and address those issues. And equity is a core component of our mandate.
So to that point, and I agree with that 100%, to that point, I think that we know, and it wasn't necessarily in today's data, but I think that we know from data that's out there that exists with the city and in the county, that we need about 5,000 total units, 4,700, somewhere in that 4,000 to 5,000 total units, if we were to have everybody in the county have a place to sleep every night, and to bring rents and things down to where the housing field is in balance. Now, we're not going to be able to do that right offhand. I mean, but what our goal should be is how do we get to the place where we deal with the affordability issue overall and make some targeted investments in some things that we know are really useful, like a permanent shelter, securing stuff for the women's shelter, having camping and micro housing options and transitional housing options available to people. If we can really make that big investment in permanent housing, permanent supported housing, with some targeted investments in emergency services, we can go a long ways. And towards equity and inclusion, if those things were available to people, where there were housing options available for them to go, we would make sure, and we would know that that has to be available to everybody. It's not just for one particular population. That's for everybody. It's across the board. So solve the affordability issue, target some investments, and you've really made some major, major contributions to improving life for a lot of people here.
Yeah, I think we're in triage mode at this point when it comes to money.
Well, thank you all. I want to just add one thing to what Zan said. I am reaching out to different leaders and organizations that are culturally competent to serve Native American and Black individuals, to make sure that they're part of the discussion and part of the process, and do work on my end to attend their meetings, to get their feedback, or to just listen and learn, and also invite them to these meetings, but not expect them to do the work to educate us. And so I'm doing as much as I can on that front, with the NAACP and with different tribal leaders, and Zan and Commissioner Jaramillo are helping to facilitate those discussions to really start the dialogue of how do you want to be involved? What first steps do you want to attend our meeting? Should we attend yours? And if we are going to do this in an equitable and culturally competent way, what does that look like from your perspective? So Reese, it's not prioritizing someone who's Black, but it's making sure that leaders of the Black community are involved in this discussion and help frame how we strategize. And then also getting feedback on, what does housing look like? When Zan and I had a meeting with one of the tribal liaisons, he said, if you were going to do a community garden, it would need to have certain plants in it that have meaning to Native Americans, and that would draw them there and make them feel at home. And I would never have known that. So making sure that people are involved in the process of shaping some of the recommendations as well. So we're laying the groundwork for that, and I'm doing all that I can. But I also welcome suggestions. So if any of you have suggestions for organizations or leaders or individuals, I want to thank Lori. She recommended Luhui White Bear over at OSU's Longhouse, and I've been working to try to connect with her as well, as someone who understands the Native American needs. So thank you. I'm sorry, I'm reading a chat. Okay, Andrea, I'll follow up with you on the Siletz tribe. Well, any closing thoughts on this? I think we have covered everything we're going to be able to cover today, and really set up the presentations for next month and shaped what this group would like to see from them. Okay. We're doing our best. We're trying to move forward and make some progress in the middle of a pandemic that's making it all remote. And it's not going to be perfect. And I know I've said this before, but perfect cannot be the enemy of good. And we will move forward. We'll do some good, and we'll do our best given the situation. Thanks to you all. Please feel free. Oh, thanks, Jan. Please feel free to email me, any members of the public, and the minutes from last month's meeting will be posted to the H.O.P.E website, and reach out to me if you have any questions. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
I will see some of you next month and some of you sooner. You all take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Good job, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Paula, do you need me to keep this open for the chat? Do you need to copy and paste anything from the chat, Paula?
No, I already copied and pasted the chat notes, so I've got them.
Okay, great.
I'm good.
This should be downloaded to my laptop. So once I've got the recording, I think it's too big to send. But I do think that I should be able to post it to the H.O.P.E website or to the county calendar, and then I'll make sure to get you that.
That would be perfect. I could just get it right out of the folder then.
Okay, thanks so much, Paula.
Thank you. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.